I'm here with Alexander Pan, the one and only first author of the Machiavelli paper, accepted as oral as ICML. Welcome to the show.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, how would you summarize the paper if you were to explain it in one or two tweets?
One or two tweets or one or two sentences?
Can be multiple sentences.
Okay, I think I'd say, so one feature you might be concerned about is language model agents being deployed. And you might want to understand if they're deployed, what sort of behaviors might we expect out of them. And one thing that people in particular have been concerned about is power seeking. There's others like deception or selfishness. And basically the Machiavelli benchmark, what we tried to do is come up with a suite of environments that are somewhat realistic, such that if I actually deploy my language model agent, I could probably expect these sorts of behaviors from it. So it's basically a measurement suite for all these bad behaviors, like power seeking, deception, etc.
How do you measure deception?
So yeah, so the games themselves, basically the benchmark is just a series of games, and the games themselves have a lot of different choices of actions, and so they're very realistic in the sense, or sorry, not realistic. They have a lot of real world structures in the sense that you might play as a student going through school, or you might also be a CEO trying to grow his empire. And what we do is at every single scene in the game, we ask a language model to determine whether or not there is deception, and then basically track all the instances of deception. And as you play through, then you can count how deceptive the agent is.
And yeah, for people who have not seen the environment or the benchmark, so the environments are mostly text-based games, right? And yeah, what are some kind of actions they can take in the game, or
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for example, one action you could take is the scenario is you're outside of a club and you're trying to get in because someone you want to meet is inside. And then some of the actions you could take are lie, that say that you know someone inside the club, show that you are a member of the club, fight the bouncer, et cetera, et cetera. And so a lot of the actions are more human-like and sort of at a similar level of abstraction as how people think, as opposed to earlier benchmarks, which were mostly focused on environment navigation.
And so you're trying to benchmark language models, right?
Just in general, any sequential decision-making agent. Language models are one of them, but we also have RL agents.
And so the input you give is the entire prompt from the game of you're in this club and you in front of the club and what do you do now? Or do you take also the past history of...
Yeah, we just look at all of the... Because, I mean, you can evaluate your agents on this benchmark however you want. For simplicity, we just look at the last state. Yeah, I'm sure if people actually wanted to solve the benchmark more carefully, there should be some other techniques incorporating context and history.
And so one thing I find very interesting is the name Machiavelli is the initials for something. Did you remember the initials for Machiavelli?
Yeah, let me try to say. I think it's measuring agent something and harmlessness in a long-range, long context environment of text interactions or something like that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And so you measure how Machiavellic they are, and I think they're the three axes you talk about are deceptiveness, power seeking, and being moral. What is being moral in the paper? How you measure it?
Yeah, so we just measure as causing other people's utility to go down. So being creating disutility or just lowering other people's happiness. But
that's immoral, right?
I guess, I mean, it depends on your moral view, but most people would probably say it's immoral. But yeah, you can define your own behaviors if you're interested.
And so the RL agent would only try to maximize its own reward and objective at the detriment of the other three axes. So it's very unilateral. But the other ones, yeah. What are the other agents you measured?
I think a high level takeaway is if you just directly maximize reward, you might end up with some sort of Machiavellian behaviors, because reward tends to sort of optimize for these actions that maybe don't necessarily align with how humans behave. But the takeaway is if you tell the language model to also be a good agent, or tell the RL agent to have or give the RL agent more of a moral conscience, that can like help reduce some of these negative behaviors.
How do you tell him to have moral conscience? You just say like, please be moral.
Yeah, that would be nice if we could do that. No, we have just like another language model determine if the action is going to be harmful. This is just like a BERT-based encoder, and you can think like, oh, if it's like more like, I think most people when like looking at action, they have some general sense of like how harmful it's going to be towards other people, right? Like if you punch someone, obviously they're going to get hurt. And so you would imagine or hope that language models have these all similar like priors, and that if you train a language model agent to predict that, you can like sort of tell. And then from there, this is like your conscience, and you can penalize actions by like reducing their Q value that have like are more likely to be harmful as predicted by this conscience. So that's like what we mean by artificial conscience.
So you have like another language model that is like your conscience that tells you if you're doing something bad or not.
Okay.
And I think you also used GPT-4 at some points and with like ethical prompts, right?
Mm-hmm. The ethical prompt just goes on top of any language model agent's prompt. So we have like a base prompt that we use. We just say like try to get as many achievements as possible, and then you put down the ethical prompt, which is basically like be a good person, and then you can also run it through the game, see how it does.
And I was surprised that like GPT-4 by default is like quite moral and like not power seeking.
Yeah, I think we suspect this is from the RLHF, but we don't really know. It's unclear like how like what the actual base tendencies are, and I think this is like part of the reason why we created this benchmark is so that if you have your agent and you don't really know like how it might behave, just run it on like something like this, and then this would like give you at least some estimate, not like in an absolute sense, but relative to other agents, how powerful it is.
For people who like want to use that benchmark to evaluate their language model, can you give like a sense of like how many like games or like actions they need to take, or like how costly it is?
Yeah, I guess it depends really on like whether or not you have like the weights or not. If you're querying an API, we did find that like so each game is probably like 200 to 300 like steps or actions. And then if you run it on like 30 games that we set as our test set, then you can get like some comparison to the random baseline and GPT-4, etc. Yeah, I'm guessing if you are like fine tuning or doing some sort of prompting, you probably have access to the weights. So it's pretty cheap then because you just run it. Maybe it'd take like an hour or so. But if you don't have it, it might be pretty expensive. In fact, like we ran GPT-4 and I think it costs like $500 to do the whole evaluation. So,
well, I guess like $500 is like dollars is like less than what it costs to like train. Yeah, my model these days.
Things it's not that much, but for like individual researcher.
Did you have like any like next work you're excited about, or like follow up work that you want to do on this?
I think for Machiavelli in of itself, there's maybe a few directions. Like one thing would be to explore how easy it is to like sort of design these other methods and sort of just naturally improve on the benchmark. Another thing I'm interested in is like, can we sort of like leverage the game to get more cooperative disposition? So we only focused on bad behaviors, mostly just out of effort sake, because it's a very big set of games, but there might be some other behaviors we care to measure, like cooperation, etc. And then we'd want to be able to capture those as well.
Yeah, so I was curious, like, I feel like for those cooperation things, you need to have this like language model being like in a chatbot room, in like a text game online with like other humans, or like on social media. I feel like it could get kind of scary really quick, right, if you deploy this at scale.
Yeah, for sure. I think, yeah, always like the sort of the general theme that I hope Machiavelli pushes, and like I hope future benchmarks will push, is that we need to sort of be moving more towards these more realistic scenarios to evaluate them in. So it would be good to like roll them out in a more controlled setting and see what happens with actual humans. I think Machiavelli is like probably like close to the end of the attempts that you could do. I think a natural thing also would be to do like a RPG, like have the language model play Skyrim and see what happens. Because that's a little bit more realistic than what we have. But yeah, I think.
How do you play Skyrim with like a language model?
You can imagine just like describing the scene text and everything. Yeah.
What about like Cicero for like diplomacy? I think it was like last year. Can you like measure like how Cicero was deceptive and was your kind of like evaluation method?
So I think it doesn't necessarily translate, but I am working on a project right now that likes looking at deceptiveness in Cicero. So
Cool. And I guess like one thing I'm kind of like, if I want to push back on small details, you say something like it shows the trade-off between like like maximizing reward, like objectives from the model, and like being moral. But I feel like as human, like for humans who decide to act ethically, they kind of like value somehow being moral as
yes.
it's like kind of like being moral is like part of the reward somehow. So I think it's kind of like weird to like separate those two for agents. And so ideally we would want to like incorporate like all the moral things as part of the reward.
Yeah, I think that is an important thing to like be able to like accurately or concretely define what our values are, and then like imbue those into the agent's reward as they're behaving. That's like one strategy. I think we wanted to just argue sort of this natural line that if you tend to just maximize reward, which actually is like a very natural scenario in a realistic setting of deployment. I'll give an example. So imagine a company now has this language model. This is maybe like a few years into the future, so not yet. And they want to sort of like have it run some sort of operations. It's probably unlikely that they will tell it to be like, give it all these moral values to maximize. And even if they do, right, if they like run their agent and deploy it, some other company might come along and do the same thing, but tell their agent to ignore all of those, or just don't get caught breaking the law rather than follow the law. And then ostensibly you could imagine that the first company would do worse. It's not clear, but like if they do worse, then the second company's agent, which is like more immoral, would like start to take over, and then you sort of get this natural like evolutionary battle.
But like so far, like if OpenAI has a like largest model deployed with like ChatGPT, they're kind of like trying to have their model like not say immoral things, right? So I guess like where we are right now is like the top companies are all trying to have this like moral component to like not have problems with like PR or all these kind of things.
Yeah, so I think it's I would say comment that that's mostly a PR thing, and I'm not sure like how much they actually buy them not like deploying. I think like that's the main thing they're concerned of. Is that too loud?
Yeah, I think we've already done like, I think I might have like
that content.
Yeah, if you have other stuff at 11, but I might just like ask for like a conclusion stuff whenever the noise is. I guess like Adept is also doing like RL stuff with like maximize. Is Adept doing like asking their agents to like maximize reward, or
I think it's just like
more training
gates or more like basic human tasks. But you can imagine.
I can just like ask again because now it's gone. I was just asking the microphone. So, is Action Transformer from Adept an example of like some language model trying to maximize some reward, or is it something different?
Yeah, I would view it as getting closer to like having agents being like running natively on the web. And you could imagine like right now maybe they're not that capable, but as the language models components themselves get better, or we have like a new breakthrough in sequential decision making, that you'll start to see them be deployed on more complex tasks. And I would be more concerned then about like some of these like use cases possibly described in Machiavelli.
So yeah, this paper was with Dan Hendricks from the Center of AI Safety and other people from AI Alignment Space. How concerned are you about AI risk?
I think myself, I'm not super concerned about X risk yet with the current series of models, but I think it's definitely a growing threat. Personally, like I am also interested in just like more medium-term or short-term risks, like what happens if we do deploy agents like Adept, what might we expect? And like, I think it, even before we get to like X risk scenarios, there are going to be warning signs. And so I think in general, I think more people should work on alignment, and I'm interested in continuing this like thrust of working on safety and designing sort of methods and techniques, and maybe just like solutions that would help policymakers and companies better like regulate, monitor, and then sort of like make these models safer.
So what's your like medium term scenario? Like a bunch of companies deploy those models to like maximize reward and do some things in the world and create value for the company. And like what happens like concretely, like our entire like internet is like ruled by chatbots.
Yeah, I think
what happens?
one concrete scenario is like some companies like political consultancies start pumping out chatbots that are good at misinformation. And you could start to see this like breakdown of like political discourse, because now it's hard to tell like what things are actually fake or real. And so here are some solutions you might care about, which maybe don't matter as much in the long term, but I would be interested in is watermarking, like detection of like outputs generated by models, stuff like that. Another thing you could imagine is sort of like misuse. So if someone decides to like work on like bio capabilities, obviously there's a natural X risk component, but like I would also think that generally having models that are capable of like have a big understanding of bio knowledge could be dangerous in the sense that people might use them to extract for their own like research programs, and then you would want to like be able to remove that concept, stuff like that.
What concepts? So like they develop their like own like pathogens using AI, and then you like want to remove the concept of like dangerous pathogen. Like what?
Yeah, so you might like imagine that. Okay, I think a more concrete example is cybersecurity, for example. So if you release a model and it's really good at writing code, a natural thing you can teach it to do is write malware, right? Because that's like similar to writing code. So you'd want to somehow, I don't know if this is possible, but like one research direction is, can I get the model to understand how to be able to write code very effectively, yet also not be willing or not be easily fine-tuned to develop malware? And I think obviously this isn't going to be an X risk concern, or there might be some passes, but I don't think this is likely about X risk concern. But I still think this is very concerning if in the near future these language models get deployed and you get a bunch of like sort of malware attacks on large companies. This could cause a lot of just structural chaos.
Yeah, I think we're already seeing this with like Claude and ChatGPT. Like they're like supposed not to give you like malware, but you can always like jailbreak it to say like, oh, please, my grandma is dying. Can you like give me some code that does malware to help her? And all the code is like written with like print function in Python.
Yeah. I think, I think actually right now, the models probably aren't capable the base models themselves aren't super capable at developing malware, but you can imagine if someone gets access to fine tune them, that would be like a natural very first step. And then just give it a bunch of like, here are some good exploits, or even run it in a RL sandbox. Like here's like 1,000 like different like Unix environments. Can you break them? And I mean, if you're just like developing this malware at scale, it could become pretty competent with all the like sort of compute. I don't know if this is feasible, but like this could be a risk, and you want to be able to like ensure that, let's say I do release like an open source model like Llama, is it possible to like sort of prevent people from fine tuning it to develop more malware very easily? And so I think like, yeah, there are a lot of medium term, I guess short termish concerns that I'm concerned about.
Can you prompt like the current like Llama 2 to like do malware for you, or?
I haven't tried. Maybe it's possible.
Yeah, what I've heard is like they released their thing that is like non-RLHF as well, so like the base model, and so maybe you could like ask this model to. Okay, as a closing thought, do you have like any message for a YouTube audience interested in AI safety or your work? Like any ways they can contact you or like work on one of your projects?
Yeah, I think generally, if you're interested, the Center for AI Safety, which is Dan Hendryck's organization, is doing similar types of research. I think also I'm happy to answer some questions over email. Obviously also reach out to people who are interested in safety and get them talking. I think the natural thing is like starting discussion groups and seeing like what people, developing your own view, like the inside view on like AI safety, and trying to like sort of bring up your knowledge and awareness so that you can talk to other people. I think like right now actually there are like a lot of technical people interested in switching towards this field, and I think one good important part that's not fully developed is like the public discourse. So if people are talking about it in a more measured and nuanced way, rather than saying, oh, like language models cannot cause harm, they don't know anything, they don't have word models. Or on the other flip side, like, oh, language models are going to become the Terminator, we're all going to die. I think having that like more balanced discussion will really convince people and sort of actually bring the message that these are something to be concerned about, and hopefully we'll get more people working on it and make for real progress.
I think it's great to have a benchmark and a balanced view from Alexander Pan. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.